Today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Chet, another very interesting daf, all starting with the relationship between Gzar Din, not Gzar Din, what is the strength of repentance? Can it change? Can it not? And then from there, we're going to get into a totally different topic about fastings. Today's daf is sponsored by Rena Goldberg in memory of her aunt, Valley Densa Zichrona Lebracha, who lived to the age of 100 plus. She, like her siblings, was educated in the Hildesheimer Yeshiva in Berlin and lived a life replete with chesed. And by the Fortinskis, Mazel Tov to Gudi and Eric Weil on Netanel and Adina's wedding. It will take place tonight. Mazel Tov. Okay, we're going to start where we ended yesterday. We were in the middle of a Braita, where a woman named Gloria Hagioret, if you want to know more about her, you can read Flashback by Shula Mishkin on our site about the history of Gloria Hagioret and a little bit of other things mixed in there in general about converts from then. Anyway, it's an interesting read. So Gloria Hagioret asked Rabban Gamliel, I don't understand. It says God won't favor or judge you favorably. And it also says God should look upon you favorably. So how could on the one hand he won't look upon you favorably, on the other hand he will look? How do we deal with that? So we ended with this mashal that Rabbi Yossi HaKohen gave about how when it comes to ben adam lamakom, between man and God or woman and God, God will come and say, I can forgive that. I can look beyond that. But when it comes to between people, you have to deal with that yourself. God can't come, lo yisa panim. He's not going to find favor until you deal with it with your fellow friend. So that's the way he explained it. But the last words of the daf of yesterday are ad sheba Rabbi Akiva v'limein, until Rabbi Akiva came along and said, kan kodem gzar din, kan la'achar gzar din. No, it's just a difference between whether God already decided, this is it, you're done. This is what's going to happen to you. Then, lo yisa panim, God is not going to change it in any way. But if before Gzar Din, then yisa Hashem panav elecha. So, why did we bring this? Because we were dealing with Rabbi Yochanan, who basically said, Gdolat tshuva is so great, shemakrat gzar dino shel adam. You can basically tear a divine decree that was written about you. So this seems to say you can't, because lo yisa panim after Gzar Din. So how do you respond to that? Ha chanami biyachid. Again, we can say this is the difference between an individual and the community. When it comes to an individual can't change your decree. When it comes to the community, a community decree can change. So Rabbi Yochanan was talking about community, even though we didn't say that. And this is talking about in an individual level. Obviously, the whole conversation about this is not the most practical conversation because we have no idea when there's Gzar Din or when there isn't Gzar Din, right? That's something that is decided in heaven, right? That we have no way of knowing. So the relevance of it is a little bit it's not super relevant in a practical sphere. Now we're going to start dealing with the Gzar Din v'yachid. And we want to know, is it really, you can't change Gzar Din v'yachid? So the Gemara is going to say, Gzar Din v'yachid tanahi. In fact, it's a machloket tanaim. There are people who think that even an individual can change, which then means that all these questions we brought up against Rabbi Yochanan, and we said it doesn't sound like you can change a divine decree, we're going to see that maybe you can in the end, that basically, that maybe Rabbi Yochanan thinks that you can, and all the opinions that we quoted were according to the other opinion, okay? And then that raises a question on how to really understand Rabbi Yochanan. So let's see the machloket tanaim. Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Meir used to say, two people are in bed, they look the same, they have the same disease. Two people went into the courthouse to get judged, and they're both judged to death, same judgment. So one got out of bed and the other one didn't, got better. One was saved from death penalty and the other one wasn't. Right? To you, these two pictures look exactly the same. Why did that one get out of bed and that one didn't? Why did that one get saved from death penalty and that one didn't? Right? This one prayed and his prayers were answered. This one prayed, prayers weren't answered. So why is that? So we're going to have different answers. One option is to say, Because It was a matter of what was the content of their tefillah. What kind of tefillah did they pray? What was the quality of the prayer? One had a better prayer and the other one didn't. And that's why one was answered, the other one wasn't. Rabbi Elazar Amar, kan kodin gzardin, kan la'achar gzardin. He says, no, one, you didn't realize this by looking at the situation, but one, his judgment was already sealed. The other one, the judgment wasn't sealed yet. And therefore, according to Rabbi Elazar, it seems clear, after gzardin, you can't change. But according to the first opinion, it seems like you could. And in fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Amal, Yafetz akal adam ben kodin gzardin, ben la'achar gzardin. He disagrees with Rabbi Elazar and says, no, you can always call out to God even after gzardin. So from here, you see, there's a difference of opinion about whether one can change a decree by God or one cannot change a decree once it's sealed. But that's all on the yachid level. On the tzibor level, it seemed clear that you could definitely change what's going to be. So now we want to question that as well. Can it really be torn? We're first going to bring a contradiction. One pasuk says, okay, there's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, you can wash out wash out the evil from your heart. Okay, it sounds like if you can wash it, laundry, we have dirty laundry, we wash it, it gets clean. Uktiv, and it also says, Ki im techapsi b'neter v'tarbi lach borit, if you use all these detergents to clean yourself out, nichtam avonech lefanai. Nichtam with a chaf, okay, I don't want you to get confused between nichtam is to seal, that's with a chet. Nichtam with a chaf is to be stained. Now it's kind of similar, because if it's stained, then it's permanent. Now, you get a stain in the shirt, sometimes it just doesn't come out. So nichtam avonech lefanai, you could try to wash out your stained as best as you can. In the end, your sin will be stained forever in front, in my mind. Lifanai. So how do you resolve that contradiction? One says, wash out your evil deeds. You can wash them out of your heart. The other one says they'll never be washed out. So my love, kan kodin gzardin, kan la'achar gzardin. It sounds like one's before, one's after. And these psukim in the Navi are referring, they're both from Yirmiyahu, they're referring to the community. So it sounds like the community is not able to change a gzardin, right? In other words, before the gzardin, they can wash it out. Once it's done, it's done. So what do they answer? Lo kasha. Kam b'gzardin sheyesh imo shvuah, kam b'gzardin she'en imo shvuah. We're now going to start to distinguish between the quality of the gzardin. Okay, there's a more harsh gzardin and there's a less harsh. There's a gzardin that comes along with a shvuah, that God swears that this is going to happen. When God swears, then it's a gzardin of, a higher level. That one can't be changed. That's where the Navi says, you're done. Your stain is there forever. If you say, if it's without God swearing, then then it can be changed. So let's give an example, because that's not really helpful. When do we see God swearing, right? It's not a common thing. So, Kid Rav Shmuel Bar Ami, as Rav Shmuel Bar Ami says, the Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Ami, the Amre la Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, okay, either this Shmuel or a different Shmuel. Minayin l'gzardin sheyesh imo shvuah she'eino nikah. How do we know? Okay, he said exactly this. If you have a gzardin, God decrees something and swears about it, then it can't be changed. Shene'amar, we are now going to Sefer Shmuel, Lachen nishbati lebeit Eli, Im yitkaper avon beit Eli bezevach uvemincha. If you remember the family of Eli, the sons abused their power in the temple. They were Kohanim. Right, there's all different interpretations about what exactly they did. We're not going to get into that now. But as a result, they were punished. And the whole family of Eli was punished going forward. And we're going to see their big punishment is that they won't live long lives. Okay, and whenever they have someone whose lives are cut short, they always assume they must be mi Beit Eli, because that was the curse of Beit Eli. So I will swear that im yitkaper avon Beit Eli bezevach umincha. I'm swearing, right? The Navi says this, but it's in the name of God, that this sin will not be atoned by sacrifices. So Amarava. So first, okay, so the point right now is, if God swears, then it will never change. So basically the punishment of Eli is forever. There's no way to repeal it. However, Kam Rav and Abai, and they say, well, it's true you can't repeal it, but pay attention to the Gzeirah. And note that it's only what it says and not what it doesn't say. So for example, Rava says, so you can learn Torah, and that you can't bring sacrifices, and it makes sense actually because they've used their power in the temple with sacrifices. So you can't use that to atone, but it sounds like you can do something else. So, right, if we take our big three, Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, as it says in Pirkei Avot, it says, okay, not Avodah, not ritual, but Torah, we can use Torah. He says, well, there's another one. Don't ignore Gemilut Chasadim. That also you can use to atone. So now, Rabba v'Abaye debate Eli ka'atu. By the way, right, maybe it makes sense why they wanted to say this. They came from the house of Eli, and they didn't want to end up dying young. So they tried to come up with ways, things they could do to get out of this gzera. So now we're going to see Rabba da'asak b'Torah chaya 40 shnin. So Rabba learned Torah. That gave him an extra 20 years. The assumption is that we're going to die around 20. That's young. And therefore, he got an extra 20 years and was able to live till 40. Abaye da'asak b'Torah Gemilut Chasadim chaya shitin shnin. He got 20 years for Torah and 20 years for Gemilut Chesed. So because of that, he lived till the year of 60. I don't know if this is all historically accurate. One can check if there's any references to this anywhere in history, but that's what the Gemara says about it. Tanu Rabbanan, still in this topic of Bnei Eli, which we got to because we wanted to know, is the Gzar Din of the Tzibor, can it be torn and redone? So we said only if it doesn't have that God didn't swear about it. If God swore about it, like Beit Eli, it can't be. However, it's kind of almost saying there's always ways around it, right? You can figure out some way. Now notice they still died young, right? They just didn't die as young as they should have died. I mean, whether 60 was an average age in those days, maybe 40 was not. Tanu Rabbanan, Mishpacha achat hayta b'Yerushalayim shayu metim b'nei Yud Chet Shana. Okay, there was this family that all their sons were dying young, at 18. They went to him and said, can you help us? Amar lahem shema mishpachat Eliatem. Maybe you're part of the Eli family, and that's why you're dying, right? They obviously didn't have good lineage. They didn't know they dated back to this family anyway. So he says, but maybe you're from there. Dichtiv bein. Now we're going to see the verse where it says that you're going to die young. V'chol marbit beitcha yamutu anashim. Okay, that's one of the things it says, right? You will all basically die young. So go sit in the Beit Midrash and learn Torah, and that will give you extra life. As we saw Rav and Abaye saying, notice Rav and Abaye were after Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. He obviously said it first. Okay, they basically lived longer lives, and they called the family in the name of Rabban Yochanan because he basically saved them from dying. Okay, so we had two questions so far in our daf. One was just finishing up from yesterday. That was before. I'm not going to even get to that. But the first question is Gzar Din of Yachid, we're going to show is a Tanaitic debate, whether it can be repealed or not by tshuva. The second was assuming what we said earlier, which was for sure that tzibor can be torn. Is that really true? What about, we see not necessarily? Well, we're going to distinguish between with a shvuah and without a shvuah. Now we're going to ask, and from that we got into Eli, where there was a shvuah associated with it, and yet we still found a way around it. But really, technically speaking, the Gzar Din cannot be repealed. It can be worked around. Say, zevach u'mincha, you can't, but other ways you can. Okay. Now we're going to ask. So Amar Rav Shmuel bar Inya Mishmei Derav. How do we know minayin l'gzar din shel tzibor she'eino nechtam with a chet? How do we know that a gzar din of a tzibor is not sealed? So the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean? Eino nechtam v'aktiv. What do you mean it's never sealed? First of all, we've been talking about after the gzar din you can change it, but it's sealed. We assumed it was sealed, and not only that, but this is why I keep saying with the chaf and the chet, we're going to use the pasuk with the chaf of the nechtam. We're now going to say, Eino nechtam v'aktiv nichtam avonech lefanai. So it says your sin is stained forever. So it sounds like it is sealed because it's stained. Stained is synonymous almost with sealed. Ela afal gav shenichtam nikra. His question was, how do you know exactly what we've been talking about, that even once it's sealed, it can be torn? Okay, how do we know this? Shene'amal ka'Hashem Elokeinu b'chol kol'enu elav. This is a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim where it says, Ki mi goy gadol asher Elohim krovim elav, Hashem Elokeinu, and as who is a nation, and as what nation has God so close to us that bechol koreinu elav, we can call him whenever we want. That sounds like we can always change things. On the one hand, it says that. Okay, we're not yet up to the question. Okay, we're going to see. We're not even up to the question. Right now, we have one verse that says you can call God whenever you want. This is a very famous Gemara. On the other hand, it says, call out to God when he can be found. So first it says you can call God whenever you want. Then it sounds like, well, you can only seek out God when he is found. How do we resolve that contradiction? So they say, it must be. You can call out to God anytime you want if you're the community. This is where we get the power of tefillah b'tzibur, that the prayers of the community are answered. That's why people like to go to minyan, because tzibur has a lot of strength that the yachid doesn't. The yachid can only really change things when bihi matzo, which we don't yet know what that is. Okay, but the point is that we already said that this is our proof for afal pi shenichtam nikra of the tzibur. There you have your proof, because it says kachol koreinu elav. We can call out to God whenever we want as a community. So now they want to know b'yachid emat, right? Big question. So when is bihi matzo? We want to know so that we can know to turn to God. So what do they answer? Amar Rabba bar Ravua, Elu asara yamim sheben Rosh Hashanah liyom kippurim. This is where we get the concept of aseret yemei tshuva. Dirshu Hashem b'yimatzo. When is God found? God is found during the aseret yemei tshuva. That's when God is more present, more available. This is when we can really have the power to change things. And that's also because our fate isn't sealed yet. That's the whole idea. That fits in with what we're saying. The yachid can't change what's sealed, but here's the time right before it's sealed, from the time we get judged to the time it gets sealed. That's when we have the power to change things. It's interesting to note that in the Yerushalmi, they say that bihi matzo is in the temple, in a location, not a time. I understand this verse very differently. I was wondering if it's because the Yerushalmi was written in Israel, even though it was no longer the time of the temple, but they saw the temple as more central. And here it's your ability without a temple, because we don't have a temple, right? It even fits with the previous sugya about you can't do a bezevach umincha with sacrifice, but you can do, there's alternatives. And those work even better than sacrifice. So it's the Babylonian galut, exile, where we don't even have the potential that we're going to have a temple here, that it's other things that work. So that's an interesting debate about how you understand bihi matzo. So now, how do we know that there's these 10 days? So now we're going to quote something totally seemingly unrelated, the story of Naval and Avigail with David HaMelech. Okay, Naval was a guy who had a lot of sheep, and David gave him protection. And then when he went to shear the sheep, David sent his men to say, I want, almost like maaser, like Reshit Agez, give me some of what all your proceeds, because we've given you protection, you should get. And Naval's response is, who are you? And I don't know who David is. I don't know who Ben Yishai is. And what are you coming here? He basically pushed them off. David gets very angry and he wants to kill them and kill him and his people. And Avigail, the wife, comes and begs David to forgive. And David basically decides to leave it alone. But what happens is, here's the end of the section. After 10 days, God brings a plague on him and Naval dies. So he dies by the hands of God, not by the hands of David. In the end, David then, right after that, marries Abigail. So anyway, that's the story. So what's this Aseret Yamim? Why 10 days? What's the significance of these 10 days? The first interpretation is, well, when the people came, it's true he wouldn't give them the shearings, he gave them a little bit to drink. He couldn't leave them without giving them a cup of wine. So he gave them each a teeny sip. So for each sip, that gave him merits that let him live 10 more days. But Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Ravua says, Elu asara yamim ben Rosh Hashanah liyom kippurim. He had 10 days to be judged. It was the 10 days right before God sealed his fate. He had these 10 days. There's a reference in the Torah for this concept of having 10 days to basically change things. So basically, again, we're back to, this was all brought. How do you know that the Gzar Din of a tzibur, even if it's sealed, can be torn? Not an individual. And we get it from this contradiction between the two psukim. Is God available whenever we call out, or is God only available, right, in a certain time? So the certain time is for the individuals versus the tzibor, which anytime the tzibor has the power to over, right? This goes back to what we said yesterday about the Hashem kel rachum v'chanun, right? God taught us how to basically turn to him and always be answered. Rosh Hashanah, now we're going back to the Mishnah that we read. Rosh Hashanah kol ba'ei olam ovrim lefanecha kivnei maron. Everybody passes like the sons of Maron. We don't know what Maron is. We're going to see three interpretations. My kivnei maron, hachatirgumu. Here they explain, meaning in Babylonia, they explain kibnei imrana, like the sons of sheep. Okay, the sheep go, and here we all know this is the image we have because of the tefillah b'netana tokef, which is based on this, that ma'avir tzono tachat shivto, right? That the tzon goes under his staff. This comes from maaser behema. Okay, right? We learned about things, and you think you've never really heard of maaser behema, but you have before, because the way they would pass the animals one by one with the staff, so that they knew that two didn't come out by accident, and then they picked the wrong one. So they would pass them one by one, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10th one would be sanctified. And then they do it again. 10th one sanctified. Wait till we get to much later on in Shas, all these cases where you accidentally took the 11th one or the 9th one, you made a mistake. What happens? What do we do? Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But this idea that they would pass them by one, that's how we got judged before God. Here, they're obviously focusing on the individuality of each person. And don't think, oh, God's judging everybody. He won't really notice me. Right? No, everybody gets noticed. Next interpretation, you'll see all three interpretations have the same idea, that it's a one-by-one process. It's just a matter of how do we understand the word maron. Rish Lakish amar k'ma'alot beit maron. Okay, it's not exactly clear what this is. Some people actually say choron. Okay, how you get from maron to choron is a good question. But it could be this place in Meron, these ma'alot that went up, right? Maybe the incline up to Har Meron. I was thinking of the Stampede of Meron, right? It was this very narrow space, and too many people were going through, right? It would have been one by one. We could have saved ourselves, right? This idea, there's obviously some narrow something in Meron that they knew about, and it was referring to that. Third interpretation, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel kechayalot shel Beit David, like the soldiers. Soldiers also march one by one. Okay, so also there. Where do you get maron to soldiers? Because marut is authority. So it's about the authority is upon them. So also they go one by one. That's how they march. So, each of these also kind of connotes a bit of a different concept of what it's about. We like sheep going. Are we, it's interesting that they chose that one, maybe because that was the one in Bavel. Although the third one's also from Bavel. So I don't know. Or we like soldiers going. Soldiers has a much more strong, right? We're very powerful. And the ma'alot beit maron is, it's scary, right? You're going up a steep, narrow path. It's very hard to get to. There's another place where ma'alot beit maron is mentioned, and it's all about it being talul and very windy and scary. So different ways of looking about how we go before God. Do we go strong like soldiers, right? And we're very confident, or do we go like that? Or are we sheep, which are basically led by other people, almost like, this idea that we're not in charge. Anyway, you can make a lot more out of that. We're going to move on. Amar Rabbi Bar Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'kulan nizkarim b'skira achat. Even though we go one by one, we're looked at by God as one. Like he looks at us in one whole, like at one moment. Okay, what exactly does that mean? Different interpretations, right? And how does that work together with what we just said? So first, let's read on, and then we'll go back. You can think in the meantime of ideas. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, af ananami tanina. We also have a source that talks about this. Hayotzer yachad libam hamevin al kol ma'asehem. Okay, very famous pasuk. God, right, creates their hearts together, and he understands everything that they do. Okay, so now, what do we do with this pasuk? This is a pasuk in Tehillim. My kama, what does this pasuk mean? If it means what it sounds like literally, which is God created all our hearts together. It sounds like we're all one and the same, right? Dibarinu, that he created, lekule alma, the whole world, he made us all as one, right? We look exactly the same. The way you would have, you create any kind of product, and you create, thousands of them, millions of them. They all look exactly the same. Well, we all know that that's absolutely not true. Right? Chazina means we see. Look around the world. You see people they don't all have the same heart. They don't all look the same. Ela lav hachikama, does it not mean this? The Creator sees their hearts together all as one and understands them. In other words, when God judges us, he judges us all as one. So one way, and I think the most basic way of interpreting this is that, or maybe not the most basic, I don't know, but that we're judged as individuals, but how do we function within the tzibur, right? There's always, and that's what this daf is all talking about. And it's something that permeates our religion, which is we're individuals and yet we're part of a community. So we each as individuals have to do our share to be part of the community. So we're judged as individuals for how we function within the community, how much we give to the community, how much we enhance the community, et cetera. And that's a very Jewish concept, right? That and in general, the Jewish concept is we're individuals, but we're part of a whole. So, and there's always a balance between balancing where we are as individuals and using all our individual talents to be able to also influence the community and that. So that's one idea. Another idea I was thinking is that, no, I forgot it for a second. Judges all as once. Why did I forget it? Right. I was thinking it's like a test. Sometimes you get tested and most times you get tested. It's, let's say 0 to 100, but some tests you get tested on percentages. Where did you do compared to other people in the community? It's not such a Jewish concept, so I don't really think this is what it means, but I was thinking that maybe the idea is that God judges us in comparison to other people. But that's a little unfair because, if I did great and other people did great, why should I, if I didn't do as well as them? But anyway, maybe it's a bit of that concept in it. Okay, moving on, new Mishnah. Now we're starting with something we're going to get to down the road, which is, we're really going to get into now, which is Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the new moon. So one of the parts of sanctifying, you would think we'd start with sanctifying the new moon, but instead they start with this idea, al shisha chodeshim hashluchim yotzim, is the messengers that would go tell people about the upcoming, Rosh Chodesh was this day. So you would assume, if you hadn't read this Mishnah, you'd assume they must have gone out on a monthly basis. Every month, they'd send out messengers to tell the people who live farther away what day Rosh Chodesh was so they know how to keep their calendar. But they only did it al shisha chodeshim hashluchim yotzim, only 6 months a year. Why 6 months? Al Nisan mipnei Pesach, Al Av mipnei Ta'anit, because of Tisha B'Av, right? There's certain dates you need to know. It doesn't really matter if you know the date, right? Do you know what date it is today, right? Sometimes we know the date. Sometimes often we don't even know what date it is. It doesn't really matter. So, but now for us, it's more like there is a date. And it's just, do we know what date it is? In those days, it was, you don't even know what date it is until somebody tells you, well, which day was Rosh Chodesh, which meant which day was the first day of this new month. And then you wouldn't even know the date at all. But it's not really so relevant if there's no holiday. So when it's Pesach, you need to know. So Nisan, yes. Av, you need to know when Tisha B'Av is. Elul, mipnei Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is always going to be, you're going to do 2 days because you're not sure which day, but you're going to start it on the 30th day of the month of Elul is going to be the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So you need to know when Elul was to know when it's really the last, right after the last day of Elul. Al Tishrei, well, now once you did Rosh Hashanah, why do you need to go on? Well, you need to because, again, in those days, before we instituted that Rosh Hashanah is always going to be Aleph Tishrei, and we're going to count from there. But in those days, when they really still went by what was by what they saw, so you would need to know when Yom Kippur is going to be, when Sukkot is going to be, etc. So mipnei takanat moadot, al Kislev mipnei Chanukah. Chanukah comes up in Kislev. Al Adar mipnei Purim. Purim comes in Adar. When there was temple, then they needed an Iyar because people who didn't do Pesach the first time because they were tamei, they were impure, or they were far away, so they would do it in Iyar. So now the Gemara says, but wait, you're missing a few. If you're going to do Tisha B'Av, what about the Livkunami at Tammuz v'Tevet? What about the Tzom, the fast on the 17th of Tammuz, and the fast on the 10th of Tevet? How are they going to fast then if they don't know what day? Now we're going to see the source for these fasts. It says in Pasuk in Zechariah, okay, which is the 4th, right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. 4th is Tammuz. The 5th is Av, that's the next month. Shvi'i is Tishrei, that's Tzom Gedalia. And the Asiri is Tevet, Asara B'Tevet. So those days, now notice in the Pasuk, it doesn't say what day of the month, and we're going to see there's a bit of a debate about it, but it's clear what month each of these fasts are in. It says, so it says these fasts are going to become holidays, days of celebration. So how could you on the one hand call it a fast, which is a sad day, and on the other hand, call it a festive day? If there's shalom, then it's a day of rejoicing. Ain shalom, tzom. If it's not shalom, then it's a fast. So either which way, it's either going to be a fast or it's going to be a holiday. So why didn't they announce about these? Amar Papa, Hachi Kamar. Papa says this is how you should read it. Bizman sheyesh shalom, iyu l'sasonu l'simcha. When you're in a time of peace, they're happy days. What does it mean, peace? Most of the commentaries say when the temple is around. Rashi doesn't really say that. Rashi says, she'ein yad ha'umot kefal Yisrael, when your enemies aren't strong standing up against you, right? What this means is a good question. Like, where are we nowadays? Are we in a case where we have our own? Does that mean self-autonomy, that we're ruling ourselves? Or on the other hand, we have a lot of enemies who are trying to rule upon it, or at least fight against us, and we're not exactly in a peaceful state. You wouldn't really define that right now as peace. So it's a big question, right? How you would define our time period. It depends on how you define it. If you go by the Beit HaMikdash, it's obvious. We don't have a temple. But if you go by peace, and what peace means, does it mean self-autonomy? Then yes. If it doesn't mean self-autonomy, it means peace, well, then it might be something else. Anyway, that's a big, interesting question to raise. Nobody really thinks that these fasts, at least as far as I know, that the fast should be happy days at this point, but it's definitely food for thought. So he says, if there's peace, they turn into happy days. But when someone else is ruling against us, or again, it's how you define what gzerat malchut is, tzom, then it's a fast. Okay, so gzerat malchut is usually, right, there's an enemy who's ruling upon us. But ein gzerat malchut ve'ein shalom, which is what people claim, at least we're in right now, which is we don't have gzerat malchut. On the other hand, we also don't really have peace. So what's the situation then? Ratzu mitanim, ratzu ein mitanim. It's optional. Very interesting, right? I don't know if you ever heard this, that these fasts are optional. We usually see them as obligatory. Obviously, if you don't feel well, you're allowed to break your fast, and we treat them less seriously than Tisha B'Av. We can see that from all sorts of reasons. We don't start the fast at night. We start it during the day. Even that is a source of debate, by the way. Not so clear that that's the case, although we do hold that is. But anyway, they say it's optional nowadays. So because it's optional, that's why it wasn't mentioned. They don't send out shlichim because it's just optional. Now, why is it obligatory? So there's all different opinions about how to understand this. The Torah and the Shulchan Aruch basically say that since we accepted it upon ourselves, it became obligatory. This is like Mariv, same thing. Tfilat Arvit, the night prayer also was optional, and then the community accepted it as an obligation. It became obligatory. So it could fall into that category. How we understand ratzu mitanim, ratzu ein mitanim, is it up to the individual? Is it only up to the community? There's also a debate about that. Can every individual just decide, do I want to fast or not? Most people think this is a communal thing. Again, you see this individual community, right? What's what? How do we understand it? There's all sorts of interesting opinions, but we'll suffice with this for right now. So now that's the answer, because it's only optional. Even if we now say it's obligatory, it's still got a different nature to it. And that's why the shlichim didn't go out. So then they say, well, if that's the case, Yihachi Tisha B'Av Nami, whatever was true for the Tzoma Revi'i and the Tzoma Shvi'i and the Tzoma Asiri. By the way, we're not talking about the Tzoma Shvi'i. Why? Because that's Tzom Gedalia, which happens in Tishrei. We already know that the shlichim go out in Tishrei for other reasons. So we don't need to have more shlichim. It's just not part of the question because it's not relevant. But what about Tisha B'Av? That should also be, you should say, right? It should be optional, and you don't need the shlichim to go out. So why do they? Amar Papa, Shani Tisha B'Av ho'il v'huchpelu bo tzarot. Tisha B'Av is worse because many bad things happen. It wasn't just one thing; it was many bad things. A few problems with the source I'll raise in a minute, which you might already know. Ta'amar Mar, as it said, B'Tisha B'Av charav habayit b'rishona uvashniya. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed twice on that day. Nilkeda Beitar v'nichlesha ha'ir. Beitar was captured. That was in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and Nichlesha ha'ir was plowed by the enemies. Those all happened on Tisha B'Av. There's actually 5 things that happened in the Mishnah and Ta'anit. This one only mentions 4. They skipped the one about Chet HaMeraglim, right? It happened, right? They cried on that night when they were told they're not going to go into the land. And they say, oh, you cried now. I'm going to give you a real reason to cry in the future. And the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. The other problem with this is it's saying because so many bad things happened, Tisha B'Av is more important than the other fasts. What's the problem? In Ta'anit, it also says that 5 things happened on Shiv Asar B'Tammuz. So also 5 different things happened on that day. But the obvious answer is these were much worse. Like, these are worse things, having the temple being destroyed twice, that trumps everything. It's interesting. It's not exactly what Rav Papa said. Rav Papa said, but maybe Uchpalu means doubled, could mean he means that the temple was destroyed twice. And maybe that's what he's referring to, even though, right, that could be that that's why they brought this Braita to tell you that the temple was destroyed twice. And maybe that's what he's referring to. And that's obviously worse than anything else. So again, you see that all the fasts are related to destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, which makes sense then that it would be, from what we said earlier, that this idea about no peace and no Gzeirah Malchut, right? What peace means, peace could really mean the temple being rebuilt, because they're all temple related. Tanya. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going to get to more in depth into these fasts and what are the dates. And we're going to see a debate between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon says, he would say 4 things, and I disagree with him. We're going to see he doesn't disagree on all of them, but you can see from the chart on the sheet today, he disagrees about some of them. Okay, not like we say the 17th of Tammuz, it's the 9th of Tammuz. That the city was broken into. On the 4th month and the 9th of the month. Right? They're all quoting different verses that describe the destruction of the temple and things that preceded it. But the first temple, obviously, we're discussing because we're in the time of the prophets. There was a big famine. And the city fell. Okay, so that it falls to the enemies. So why is it called the Summer Revi'i? This we already know. Revi'i l'chodashim. It's the 4th month. Next, right? We explained it already, what Summer Revi'i, Summer Chamishi that relates to months, but really if you read the verse, it says the 4th fast, the 5th fast, it sounds like you could be counting 4th out of 5, out of 4, or 4th, right, 4th out of 10, or whatever it is. But no, Revi'i really refers to what month? Summer Chamishi zeh Tisha B'Av shebo nisraf Beit Elokeinu. Okay, that there's no debate. We haven't yet seen the debate, but we know 9th of Tammuz is not the day we celebrate. It's the 17th. That's what Rabbi Shimon's going to say. Again, 5th month. The 3rd of Tishrei, he was assassinated. Who assassinated him? Yishmael ben Netanyahu harago. Some people say, why does it tell us this? It says it explicitly in the Nevi'im, but I think they want to stress that a Jew killed another Jew, and that's what was horrible about it. To teach you that the death of tzaddikim is equal to destruction of the temple. Okay, this is an interesting statement in and of itself. First of all, their proof is not really from here. Their proof is that there's a different verse that talks just about these 2 fasts, about Tzom Gedalia and Tisha B'Av, and because of that, they learn the comparison between them. Some people say it's actually worse than the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, which makes sense, right? Killing a person maybe is worse, maybe not, right? You could, again, individual versus community. It's again this, what's worse, right? A Jew killing another Jew, is that seen as an individual event, right? And then maybe you could say, well, it's an individual event that's horrible, but at the weight of the temple being destroyed. Or maybe you say it's actually worse because it's reflective of the community, right? You think about Retzach Rabin, right? It's a reflection on our whole community, the Rabin assassination, how we could allow such a thing to happen. So that's a whole interesting line in and of itself. So why is it called Shvi'i? Shvi'i l'chodashim, right? 7th month. Soma Asiri, Z'asara b'tevet, Shabo Samach Belech Babel Yerushalayim, right? He gets to the land of I don't know how you would define it. Shneimar v'hidvar Hashem elai b'shana tshei b'chodesh hasiri b'chol l'chodesh lemor ben adam ktov l'cha et shem hayom et etzem hayom hazeh. Write down this name. Samach melech Babel Yerushalayim. And he came to capture the city. V'amai kari le'asiri asiri l'chodashim. Now, notice this verse. Okay, began to put on the siege. This happened a year and a half before. This happened a while before. Okay, this isn't the 10th month before the destruction. Okay, right. It was on the 5th month. It wasn't 10th month and then the 5th month came next year. No, it was a year and a half before. So this happens much earlier. So now this is why Rabbi Shimon goes out against him. He says, chronologically, this happened first. It's true it was in the 10th month, but it happened actually before everything else happened. It was written here in order to keep the months in the order of the months, 4th, 5th, 7th, 10th, even though it really happened 10th, 4th, 5th, 7th, right? Because Tzom Gedalia was after the destruction already. I don't agree. That's when they found out in the exile after the destruction, which, by the way, is similar to our Mishnah. I just realized the connection, right? Same thing about the Shlichim Yotzim, to tell the people in exile, right? That sometimes in exile, they find out much later what's happening. So same thing here. The 10th is talking about when it happened. And how do we know? We have a verse to prove this. It says, okay, on that day, it was in the 10th month. And then Tzom Gedalia would be on the 5th, Asara B'Tevet would be on the 5th of Tevet, not on the 10th. This is like when you hear someone died, you're mitabel that day, you do abelut that day, you do shiva. If, let's say you only hear a year later, some relative of yours died. That was your, close relative that you're supposed to sit shiva for. So the day they heard was like the day of the Sreifa, and therefore we fast on that day. Totally different reason for Asara B'Tevet. Okay, I think I'm right. Then the order is perfect. Right? It's perfectly in order for what happened. His order is messed up. Okay, it's not in order, chronological. He goes by the order of the months, and I go by the order of how the events happen. Mine makes more sense, chronological. Last section for today. Itma, Rav Rabbi Chanina. Amre Batle Megillat Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit was the book that they had from the time of the temple, where they had a list of all different days where miracles happened, one of them being Hanukkah, we're going to see. That's where Hanukkah comes from. And the idea is, why is it called Megillat Ta'anit? It's not a day of fasting. It's the reverse. It's days that are happy days that you're not allowed to fast. You're not allowed to do eulogies, etc. So now we want to understand, right? Once the temple was destroyed, there's no longer Megillat Ta'anit, according to the first opinion. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amrei, lo batzla Megillat Ta'anit. It wasn't nullified. It still exists. So Rabbi Chanina Amrei batzla Megillat Ta'anit. Why? Hachi kamar. Zman sheyesh shalom yiyu l'sasanu l'simcha. Ein shalom tzom. Just like the fast days. They're happy days when we have the temple. They turn into fast when we don't have the temple. And this is just like that. Meaning, these were happy days in the time of the temple. Once the temple is destroyed, they're no longer happy days. So then already you can fast on them if you want. It's not an exact comparison, but it's the same concept. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amrei lo batzle Megillat Ta'anit. Hanehu ditzlina rachmana b'binyan beit hamikdash. Aval hana kedekayme kayme. Those events that happened, Megillat Ta'anit, all these miracles, were not connected to the temple. So all the fast days were connected to things relating to the temple. So therefore, when there's no temple, we're going to mourn. When we have all these happy days and things that happen, miracles that aren't connected to the temple, so the fact that there's no temple has no bearing on it whatsoever. So now, Mativ Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana is going to say, but you said Megillat Ta'anit was canceled after the temple was destroyed. We're going to have a problem with Hanukkah. They made a fast day on Hanukkah. From here, you're going to learn that the fast days, even though we don't keep this anymore, but they seem to be treating all fast days like in a severe way, right? Where you don't cut hair, you don't wash your body, okay, like you would treat Rosh, Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. So anyway, what happened here? They went and fasted on Hanukkah, came Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and they said, not only are we not fasting because it's Hanukkah, we're going to show you that we're going to do all these actions that you normally wouldn't do on a fasting. And further, Amru lahem, you don't have to do a fast to repent for the fact that you fasted on Hanukkah. So this sounds like Hanukkah is still part of Megillat Ta'anit because you can't fast, and they took that very seriously. So Amar Rav Yosef, Shane Hanukkah di'ika mitzvah. Hanukkah is different because there's a mitzvah to light candles. So that's why it's still around. And that's why you can't fast. And they took it so seriously. Why don't they just cancel Hanukkah and cancel the mitzvah? Megillat Ta'anit is batel. Why do we have the holiday of Hanukkah at all? So Elam Rav Yosef, right? Could you imagine not having Hanukkah? So Elam Rav Yosef, Shane Hanukkah de Mefarsim Nisa. The miracle is publicized. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? So Rashi says, They treated this like a Torah obligation, and therefore, in other words, all the other days didn't become as significant. Hanukkah, this is a way of saying kind of history, and the way things progress historically sometimes affects how we view them. People took it very seriously. How do we see it's Kishal Torah? We say, Ashir Kiddushan Mitzvotav Tzivanu. So it's a question. How can you say that on Hanukkah? God didn't command us to light Hanukkah candles. So they took it seriously as if it was Torah, and therefore we don't get rid of it. And therefore, of Megillat Tanit, that's what's left, even though we got rid of the rest. So now another question. Motiv Rabacha Bar Huna B'Tzlata B'Tishrei B'Telat Adkarata Min Shtaraya. They canceled the dates from the documents. We're going to see the name of God appearing in documents. We're going to see what this means. Here's the history. The Romans said you can't use God's name at all. Can't say it, anything. So, when the Cheshmonaim won the war in the Hanukkah story, they said, now we can use God's name everywhere. We're going to use it everywhere. We're going to even write it in documents. They were right, to God. So they would put God's name in. The rabbis heard this, they said, so what do you do when you have a shtar? You owe me money. As soon as I don't owe you the money, I rip it up and we throw it in the garbage. God's name is going to be thrown in the garbage. Right? And then they canceled this gezerah. They said this decision of the people to write it in documents, they canceled it. And the big celebration was, as you all know, what's to celebrate? Well, when people actually listen to what the rabbis say, that's cause for celebration. So since the people really listened, the rabbis made this into a big celebration. If you think the Megillat Tanit was canceled, then if we're going to say we don't have any of these other days, we're now going to start adding new days after Megillat Tanit was already canceled. It doesn't make any sense. They would add a new day after that was canceled. So it must be it wasn't canceled. To which they answer, it must have been the temple was still around and the Megillat Tanit was still in existence. And that was when they added this. We're going to get to another bigger question, which is the temple was still around. What was the date? I don't know if you paid attention. I read this pretty quickly, but it was the 3rd of Tishrei. The 3rd of Tishrei is Tzom Gedalia. It's a little tricky, right? It was already a happy day in those days because there was a temple. So we'll have to deal with that. And even if it wasn't a happy day, right, it was already a fast day. It seems weird that they would establish this as a, right, it's just right, as a happy day when it's a fast day. Anyway, we're going to have to deal with that in tomorrow's class. Have a great day, everyone. We'll meet up tomorrow. And did I tell you that Daf Mishalahem this week talks about fast days and the connection between Tisha B'Av and the other fasts? And if you want more detail on that in Hebrew, you can listen to Daf Mishalahem. Okay, have a great day.